All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's live cooking demonstration. Bear with me just a moment here as I get our video set up, and then we will go ahead and get started. Okay, so again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Smith. I am the Wellness Program Administrator with Georgia State University's Employee Development and Wellness Services. By trade, I am a registered dietitian, and I'm very excited to be cooking with you today. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping things. We are recording today's session, so if you or a colleague is ever interested in viewing it again later, we do make our recordings available on our EDWS YouTube channel. You can view past recordings from cooking demonstrations, as well as many of our other offerings, including stretch breaks, our workouts, our meditation sessions. There's a lot of good content on there. During today's session, if you've got questions, comments, anything like that, please use the WebEx chat feature. Make sure you set your response to go to all panelists. If you're experiencing any audio or visual issues, let us know in the chat, again, sending that message to all panelists. My colleague Tony Pilote is online and she's available to help assist with any of those issues that might happen during today's demonstration. With that being said, we will go ahead and get started. Today we're going to be making a cheesy broccoli pasta. Now this is kind of just a fancy version of macaroni and cheese. It's got some interesting ingredients in it that you may not have encountered before. It's very rich, very creamy. It's a pretty darn good dish and certainly a step up in fanciness from macaroni and cheese. In terms of equipment you're going to need, cutting board and a knife. We're going to use a couple mixing bowls and we'll use the stovetop. So we'll need a large saucepan to cook our pasta in and then a skillet to cook some of our vegetables in. Now the first thing I've done is I've already got a pot of water boiling. We're going to be making use of whole grain rotini today. Now I'm going to go ahead and add this into the pot for the sake of time, and then I'll come back and talk to you a little bit about why we're using this particular type of pasta and what the nutritional benefits are. So we're going to use 8 ounces of it, which this is a 16-ounce box. I've already used half of it before. So again, measure out the 8 ounces of pasta that you'll want to use. If you don't have a food scale, you can follow the measurements on the side of the box to figure out what half of that box will be, and that'll be a good estimation. So we'll go ahead and add this in. And in terms of cooking, we're just going to follow the package directions on here. So we've got a pot of boiling water. We're going to cook it uncovered for about 8 to 10 minutes. So the reason we are using whole grain rotini is going to be because the whole grain is going to add a lot of nutritional benefit. The fiber that we get from using whole grains is really beneficial when it comes to a lot of different health things. It can help with our cholesterol, our blood sugar control, and it can help us feel more satisfied, which is great if you're trying to manage your weight on fewer calories. Fiber is really beneficial. The whole grain version of pasta is also going to have a little more protein in it, which is great. So this is just the Kroger brand. You'll look for the words 100% whole grain on it. That's how you know that it's a good choice. And we're just using rotini today. So while that cooks, we'll go ahead and prep some of our vegetables here. So we're going to use a white onion and we're going to use some broccoli today. In terms of the onion, we're going to use half a cup of it, and we just want it diced up into smallish pieces. So what I'm going to do, I've already cut this in half. I'm just going to run my knife through it and basically get some slices going. Now you can do this a couple different ways. Some people will cut partially through the onion and try to keep it all together, but we're going to keep it simple today. So once you've got your slices, you can line a couple of them up. You don't want it to be too thick. And I'm essentially just going to push the onion carefully through and run the knife through it. And that's going to get us a fairly small dice, and we can always run our knife back through later to chop it up a little bit further. So again, grabbing a couple of these. So the way that I cut the onion, it will peel off naturally in these little rings, which helps with the separation as we're dicing. So then I'm just moving my knife up and down and slowly pushing the onion towards it to get that nice dice going. Once you've got that together, if you see any larger pieces, I usually will just run my knife through it a couple times, make sure we're getting them into nice, small pieces. We don't want to bite into a really big chunk of onion, and we want it to cook evenly. Okay, pretty straightforward there. So I'm going to move the onion over to the side here of the cutting board, and we're going to chop our broccoli next. We want to have this all prepared so that we can be ready to put it in the skillet as it cooks. In terms of broccoli, we're going to use about 3 cups today. You can do a little more or a little less depending on what you get out of the crowns or heads of broccoli that you buy. I'm leaning towards a little bit more. I always want to add more vegetables in, really up the nutrition content as much as possible. Broccoli is an incredibly healthy food, so I'm really going for it here. So I've got 2 heads of broccoli. Again, I'm looking for about 3 cups, but it does not have to be perfect. What we really want, though, are just going to be the tops of the broccoli. So the first cut I'm going to make, I've already rinsed this, is going to be to cut off as much of the stalk as I can. Now, this piece of broccoli is completely edible. You can cook it and get it to a nice texture, but for the sake of what we're making today, like I said, we're going to stick with the top. So I'm really going to try to trim off most of the stalk when I can. Once again, completely edible and nutritious for you, but we're just going to focus for the sake of this pasta dish on using the tops here. And then once you've got those into smaller pieces, just go ahead and run your knife through. What we're looking for ideally is going to be small pieces like this, maybe like ½ an inch at the biggest. We really don't want it to be too large so that whenever we go to cook it, it will cook evenly. Essentially, if you have a small piece of broccoli in there with a big piece, the big piece is going to cook slowly while your small piece cooks really quickly, and you'll end up with some pieces that are overdone and some pieces that are underdone, and that's just not ideal. So this is the main vegetable that we're using here, and if you've ever had any sort of cheese-based dish before, unfortunately they tend to be pretty high in calories. There's usually not a lot going for them nutritionally. Broccoli pairs so well with cheese. If you've ever had like broccoli cheese soup, I've made grilled cheeses before that have pieces of broccoli in it, and we're basically making like a fancy mac and cheese today with broccoli in it. It's a really good way to just add a little bit of nutrition to anything that's a cheese-based dish. And that's always a point I want to make whenever we're trying to eat healthier. It's not that we have to eat something like a salad. While salads are great and very nutritious for us, our goal is to eat the foods that we enjoy, but find ways to just make some small changes. So for example, we're using the whole wheat pasta today to add more fiber and protein. We're adding broccoli to a cheese-based pasta to add more vitamins and minerals. And those little swaps can really add up over time. One of the great things about this dish is if you've got kids or maybe you know some grown-ups who are picky eaters, you can make something like this that's kind of familiar, like a cheese-based pasta dish, and then just throw in a little vegetables to give them a little bit of extra nutrition without changing too much to the point that it might make them uncomfortable or make the food seem too unfamiliar. Okay, so we've got quite a lot of broccoli there. Like I said, I'm pretty zealous when it comes to adding in the vegetables like that. You don't necessarily need to do that much. We're aiming for, like I mentioned, 3 cups, but this is great in my book. So what I am going to do is measure out half a cup of onion, because I do think it's possible to do too much onion. That can definitely come across a little strong in a dish. So we're going to keep that to the measured amount. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here and we're going to use 2 tablespoons of cooking oil. I'm just using olive oil today. And we're going to heat that over a medium-high heat in a skillet. And when it comes to the oil that you choose to use, you've got a lot of options. Olive oil is a heart-healthy oil. I've talked about it before. Its smoke point is a little bit lower than other oils, meaning it can't withstand quite as high of a temperature. But we're not frying or doing anything too intense today, so it'll actually be great for this application. Olive oil pairs really well with pasta, gives it that nice kind of Italian flavor. So we're going to heat that up, and I'm going to add in the ½ cup of onion. And what I'm going to do is stir it around here. And we're going to let that cook for about 60 seconds. We want the onion to get a little bit of a head start over the broccoli before we add it in to cook. In terms of seasoning, we're going to add the broccoli in, and we're going to use 1 teaspoon of salt to give it some good flavor. We're going to use a teaspoon of red pepper flakes. Now, if you're not a big fan of spicy foods, you can scale that down or remove it entirely. Also, pay attention to how spicy your red pepper flakes are. I say that because the Kroger brand, I've never found to be all that spicy. In fact, I usually will double what a recipe recommends just to actually get some kick. But I've come across some other brands where there's definitely a little more heat to it. So know your spices. You can adjust that based on your personal taste, but we're just going to use a teaspoon of it today. So again, cooking that onion for about 60 seconds, it's going to start to become a little bit transparent. You'll start to see through it. It may even brown a little bit. And then after that 60-second mark, we're going to dump in the broccoli that we've cut up. Okay, so the broccoli's added. I'm going to add the salt and the red pepper flakes, and then we're going to stir it. So we're going to let that cook for about 3 minutes. We're going to stir it periodically. Our goal is for the broccoli to soften. You'll see it turn a vibrant green color. That's a good sign. And you can poke it with a fork or any other utensil. You want it to give a little bit. You don't want it to be super hard like a raw piece of broccoli is. So that's how you'll know it's about ready. Usually this will take about 3 minutes though to cook. We are cooking it uncovered, so you're going to see some steam rise out of there. That's totally normal. Our pasta is done cooking now. According to my package directions, it's about 10 minutes. So I've gone ahead and turned the heat off of that. Now this next part's really important. We're going to save half a cup of the pasta water, the water that we cooked the pasta in. And I'll explain why in just a minute. I'm going to grab my half cup measure. Be careful because of course the pasta is hot. We're going to just scoop out half a cup of the pasta water. So moving that over here, just setting it to the side for now. I'm going to stir my broccoli. And what we're going to do now is use a colander, just setting it in the sink. We're going to drain the rest of the pasta. Make sure you've pulled half a cup of the pasta water out first. And once you've used the colander to drain the water, go ahead and just put the pasta back into the pot. We're going to use that again in just a moment. So we'll set it over here. All right. So the reason we are stirring the broccoli is we want it to come into contact with the oil. We want it to cook evenly along with the onion. So we're going to give it another stir. We're getting close to the 3-minute mark now. So at this point, your broccoli should be pretty bright green. If you notice any of the lighter spots that are a little more yellow, looking like the raw pieces still, try to shuffle those around, see if you can get them into contact with the pan. That will help them cook a little bit more. We're gonna leave it on there for probably another minute. Added quite a bit of broccoli, so it will take a little bit longer to cook. Again, using a fork to see if you can pierce through it without much resistance. We want it to be soft. That's how we know we've cooked it enough. Try to imagine the texture being similar to the pasta. A little bit of give to it, but not too much. We want it to be pretty easy to stab through with a fork. So we pulled aside some of that pasta water, and you're gonna want a medium-sized bowl or maybe a little bit on the smaller side, and we're gonna make our cheese sauce using the pasta water. I'm gonna go ahead and kill the heat on the broccoli now because it's looking pretty good to me. And I'm just going to set that to the side. So, the reason that we used the pasta water and why we're not just using regular water, one, the heat is beneficial for helping keep everything at a nice warm temperature when we're making our sauce. But the biggest thing is, if you've ever cooked pasta before and you've noticed that the water gets a little cloudy, what that is that is starch from the pasta, kind of like a carbohydrate. So it's starch from the pasta that's mixed in with the water. And the cool property about this is whenever we have the starch kind of acts as a binder. So whenever I combine the other ingredients for this sauce and the starch from the water makes in contact with it, it's going to bind together and emulsify with the fats in our sauce. Basically what that translates to is our sauce is going to hold together a little bit better, and it's going to stick to our pasta really well and coat it very nicely. And that's what we want. We want there to be flavor on every single bite. So starting with your half a cup of pasta water, go ahead and add that in. And then the cheese we're using today is a fancy kind of cheese. Mascarpone cheese is what this is called. That's, hopefully you can see the label there. So mascarpone, M-A-S-C-A-R-P-O-N-E. This is kind of like a cream cheese, though it's much richer, it's heavier. It's made from heavy cream, so it's very, very dense. We're not going to use a big amount of it because we're going to spread it across these servings, but it's very decadent, very rich and creamy. It makes for an absolutely delicious cheese sauce here. You can find this in your grocery store either near the cheeses, or if there's a specialty cheese section, like maybe in the deli. That was where I found this when I was shopping at my local Kroger, so keep an eye out for this. So again, that's mascarpone cheese. It kind of comes in a little cream cheese-like container. So we're going to use 3 ounces of it, which is roughly half a cup. So I'm actually just going to use the same half a cup that I have the pasta in to measure this out. And you can see here it's kind of cream cheese-like, but it's much denser. Cream cheese is pretty fluffy, but since this is so rich and high in fat, you are going to notice that it's almost like buttery in how it appears. Now, this is still a healthy recipe though, even with the high fat content of this sauce. We're balancing it with a lot of vegetables and combining it with some other good ingredients so that the total calories of the dish at the end up being very reasonable while still giving you something that tastes really, really excellent. So I've measured out my half a cup. I'm going to use a spatula here to make it a little easier to get out. And we're just going to scoop that in with the pasta water. You can use the spatula to really get into the measuring cup. Make sure you get all the extra pieces. Okay. All right. And then the next ingredient we're going to use is just going to be some low-fat, plain Greek yogurt. Emphasis on plain. We don't want to do vanilla for this. So plain Greek yogurt. This is going to add a little bit of tartness to it to balance some of the flavor. It's also going to add some protein, which is a nice bonus. We're going to use a 1/4 cup of this, so you don't need to buy a full container. You can get one of the little guys here, and that will work just fine for what we're doing. So a 1/4 cup of the plain Greek yogurt going in. And the yogurt's a little more watery than the mascarpone, which is good because we want the sauce to not be so thick. We want it to be able to run a little bit. And then the last ingredient is just going to be a teaspoon of garlic powder. So we'll go ahead and sprinkle that on. Now, this is where the size of your bowl comes into play. We do want to whisk this together and incorporate it. So right now you can see there's kind of just a blob of cheese and water. We are going to whisk that around. Now this bowl is a little bit on the smaller side. When I was doing my test run of the recipe, I did need to be careful to try to avoid splashing too much. So pay attention to the size of your bowl. If you've got one that's a little bigger, that might be beneficial for you, but you can definitely whisk it in one this size. Just be patient and don't whisk too hard. So we're just spinning that around. You'll be able to feel the resistance on the whisk. You'll know when you've incorporated all of the mascarpone into the water and the yogurt. And once you have, what you end up with is it's just this nice liquidy, cheesy sauce. It's very, very tasty. Like I said, this is a pretty crowd-pleasing dish because we're using a very familiar base, something that's kind of like macaroni and cheese, but we're using a much richer cheese, a much higher quality and nicer cheese. So at this point, we have our pot of the whole grain pasta. If you're worried about cleaning your pot, you can transfer this to whatever dish you want to keep all the pasta in. If you've got like a Tupperware container. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to keep it in here, and I'm going to grab my broccoli and onions. And since I couldn't show you exactly what I was working with while I was cooking, hopefully you can see the color there. So again, that bright green, if you've ever made broccoli before, I'm sure you know what you're looking for. We want it to be, I don't want to say rubbery, but almost rubbery. We don't want it to be too hard, like I mentioned with the raw kind. So this one got cooked nicely. I'm going to grab my spoon here, and we're just going to scrape that in on top of the pasta. And this is really where a lot of the nutrition is coming from. The whole wheat pasta does have fiber. It does have protein. It's a healthier choice than your regular white pasta, but we're really making the magic happen here by adding in the broccoli. It's such a powerful vegetable and is really going to do a lot of good for us. So we've got the broccoli in there now with our red pepper flakes, and we are just going to drizzle this cheese sauce on top of it. And you can use your spatula to get out any of the extras. Make sure you get it all in there because that's where a lot of the flavor is coming from. And then the recipe actually recommends letting this sit for about 5 minutes before serving. The reason for that is you saw the cheese was pretty liquidy. That's because the pasta water was hot. As it sits and settles a little bit, it will sort of thicken somewhat over the pasta, which is nice. And then after a couple minutes, you can serve it. But for the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and plate some of this. I'll just use this spatula here, just so we can see what that looks like when it's in a bowl. Make sure I get lots of broccoli because that is my favorite part. I really love cooked broccoli. It's just very easy to make, very tasty, and like I mentioned, it's a super healthy vegetable. So we've got a good bit of the cheese sauce there. Let's move this out of the way. And then the last thing the recipe recommends is just using a little bit of Parmesan cheese. We don't want to go overboard. We've already added some salt. We have the mascarpone cheese, which is very rich, but just a little bit of this on top adds some nice extra flavor. And that's really it. It is an incredibly simple dish. Hopefully you can see that and make it out there. So the bright green broccoli against the whole grain rotini is a nice contrast. And we're getting a surprising amount of nutrition for what feels like a really basic pasta dish. The fiber inside of one of the servings of pasta is going to be 6 grams, which is already 20% of your daily goal for fiber, which is awesome. That's before we even add in the onions and the broccoli, which are going to bump that up closer to about half of your daily fiber recommendation. So we can see how we can take a dish like macaroni and cheese, put a little bit of creative spins on it, and make it into a much healthier meal. Like I mentioned, kids and picky eaters alike, this is a good dish for them because they'll have a familiar flavor, but we're adding some veggies into it to get a little bit of nutrition there. Now, if you're not a big fan of broccoli, we do have some other options of things we could cook with. Since this is, at the end of the day, just sort of an Italian pasta dish, I could see some spinach, some tomatoes, things like that going well in here. Cherry tomatoes, cutting those, like maybe quartering them and cooking them, because those give a nice little bright burst of flavor, add some acid to the dish. That could be really pleasant as well. So you can certainly mix and match the vegetables and find something that works for you if you're not a big fan of broccoli. But broccoli is fairly affordable, it's very healthy, and it works well for this dish. So in terms of leftovers, this will make about 4 servings of pasta. You'll be able to keep it in the refrigerator for 3 to 4 days. Go ahead and cover it up. And then when it comes time to eat it, I would recommend reheating it in the microwave. Helps kind of microwave the cheese, get it nice and warm and flowing again. So this is really good for meal prep or if you're just trying to make a meal for your household. So we are going to send out a copy of the recipe along with the nutrition information so you can take a closer look at how this might fit into your diet and your lifestyle. I do see we have a question or a comment here, so I want to go ahead and check those out. Okay, so there's a question here about rinsing hot pasta with cold water or not. What is the difference? So some people, whenever they are done with the pasta, they've got it in the colander, they might rinse it off. Personally, I have not ever really bothered with that step. You are welcome to do things like that if you're interested in it, if that's something that's appealing to you, but there's not really a specific need to do it. You can definitely just drain it in the colander. And I wanted to actually keep the pasta a little bit warmer here and not hit it with the cool water, just because we were adding it back into the pot, adding the broccoli on top of it, the cheese on top of it. We were trying to keep things a little bit warmer. To further that note, while you're waiting on this to settle a little bit, if you find it gets too cold, you can always put it back on top of the stovetop on a low heat for a little bit to try to heat it back up. Okay, question here about some of the different types of pasta. So, as I mentioned, we're using 100% whole grain rotini today. It doesn't have to be rotini, that's just the shape. The important part is that 100% whole grain or 100% whole wheat. That's where the fiber and the protein comes from, and that's what we're looking for. Now, you've probably seen some of the like tricolor pasta before or the vegetable pasta before. And some of those can be good options. The best thing you can do is pick up a box of whole grain, look at the nutrition label, and compare it side by side with the other options. Sometimes the ones that say they're made with vegetables just have like some dried spinach or tomato powder in them, just enough to color them, but not really add a lot of nutritional benefit. Those are typically, they're an okay choice, but they're not going to have as much fiber or protein as the whole grain, and you can see that when you compare the nutrition label. Now, if the person asking the question was talking about the truly like vegetable-based pastas where they make it out of chickpeas, or they make it out of lentils or black beans, if you've seen those in the store before, those are very good choices. If you compare the label on those, you'll find a lot of protein, you'll find a lot of fiber. Those can be really fun. If you've never tried them before, the texture and taste is a little bit different, but they're healthy options. So if you wanted to do a chickpea, lentil, or black bean-based pasta for this, you absolutely could, and you get a really great recipe in the end. So great question, appreciate you asking that. Okay. And I don't see any other questions at this time. So again, that is our cheesy broccoli pasta. I've got a nice big pot of it here in addition to the pot from when I did the test run of the recipe. So I'm pretty excited to be able to eat on this for the rest of the week. We are going to send out a copy of the recipe along with the nutrition information, and you'll get a link to a short survey. You can take that survey and let us know what you thought of today's session. If you've got suggestions for future recipes, improvements, anything we might tweak to make it a little bit of a better experience for you, we'd really appreciate your feedback. As I mentioned, the recording of this session will be uploaded to our EDWS YouTube page, where you can find previous recordings of all of our different sessions, cooking demonstrations, to workouts, to stretch breaks, to meditation. And speaking of meditation, tomorrow at 12 p.m. we have our meditation and yoga session. So if you're interested in checking that out, it is available on the GSU web calendar. If you're not already on our mailing list, you can actually email us at edws@gsu.edu, and we'll get you added on there. We send out a weekly email on Mondays where we tell people all the different events that we'll be doing, including these cooking demonstrations. So if you're interested in subscribing to that, please send us an email. I'll be sure to drop it in the chat so people can have access to that. With that being said, thank you everyone so much for attending. I see we had about 40 people attending today, which is great. I'm so glad that people are checking these out. And again, if you've got suggestions for improvement, we'd love to hear it. Otherwise, keep an eye out for that email and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.